The human story is actually what's going to empower people. Advertising flat versus globe is not going to empower people. There's nothing there. It's no different than Alex Jones talking about patriotism, the patriots against the globalists, the patriots against the new world order. It's empty. You're not rooted in anything. The only thing that Alex Jones roots you in is emotional triggering from how jacked up the entire system is and has been. And he only goes into the perspective of has been up until 1776, which benefits his own particular agenda. He's not talking about humanity. He's talking about Americana. What it boils down to, from how I see it, is that what really is going to empower people, even when people talk about, oh, we're all one in humanity and all that other stuff. Well, that's another story, and I'll get into that into a second. But to stay focused, the human story, the individual consciousness, the entities, whatever you want to call it, that lied. Why are we not talking about the system that has lied? Why are we not addressing all of the deceptions that are in and around the biggest lie? How I see it, the biggest lie, what it really boils down to is the biggest lie is to separate the individual and the collective consciousness, the people, from nature, from the soul. The university system prides itself in being atheist because being atheist means that you're just scientism. You're in this church of scientism. So you just trust whatever Einstein and Newton and Galileo and all these other people from the heliocentric universe, you just trust whatever it is that they told you to believe. But we're not going into the system of belief itself. Like, okay, well, what also was in and around the power and control structure? It just wasn't heliocentrism. It's not only separating you from nature. It's not only separating you from your creator. It's separating you from yourself. Reconnecting you back to yourself is actually what's going to activate the ability to address being separated from nature, to address being separated from your friends, your family, your culture, your history, your past, your present, your future, your soul, your mind, your body. The only way you're going to be able to do anything about it is if you activate and amplify yourself. You cannot amplify and activate yourself if the only thing that you are, only foundation, the powerful foundation that you're standing on is an image of Earth. Well, what is Earth about? What is humanity about? What are the power grids that are in and around the heliocentric deception? See, a lot of these mainstream flat earth channels, just like Alex Jones, pride themselves in one particular focus, having blinders on. And since it's so new to people, since it's so huge, it's such a big thing, and it is connected to everything else, but it's not activated until you activate yourself. You can't activate yourself from just having flat versus globe. You're not going to be able to activate that. There's no roots there. You can't empower yourself. You can't stand up. There's nothing. It's an illusion of power. That's what flat versus globe is. That's what that whole thing. It's an illusion of power because you feel powerful, but you only feel powerful in comparison to the not powerful people, the sleeping giants, the people who are still believing in heliocentrism, still sucked into that religion. Being powerful in comparison to or in reaction to is an illusion of power. You cannot empower yourself until you get into the roots. Speaking in reference to the not globe earth is only going to address the grassroots. It's never going to get into the tree roots. You're only going to be talking about the grassroots, the bark on the tree, the branches, the leaves. Yes, and that's what's going on here. When you get into the sub level of the earth, you're getting into the roots of not only the earth but the roots of you. And the way the system has created this power grid to make people believe in heliocentrism was to first separate them from their own connections to Earth. And this is what's been pissing me off since the first video that I made about flat Earth, where I was talking about how come we're not addressing the information, the actual the power, the connection that is within these ancestral cosmologies. Why is it so much focus only on how bad NASA is, and next to zero focus on how amazing humanity is? Well, because a lot of the people who are still caught up in that flat versus globe stuff don't even know who the fuck they are, let alone do they think they care, because a lot of them either have this Christian thing and they say, oh, they just close that gap with the Christian faith, or they close that gap with the New Age faith, or they close that gap with hopelessness and just saying, oh, well, I guess if it goes mainstream, we're just gonna have to deal with whatever comes about. So whatever it is, you close the gap between your responsibility to your own root structure and having been privy to the information about the not globe Earth. Whatever you use to close that gap, that's the main point that I'm focusing on with this video, is that the majority of people in the so-called flat Earth community, especially some of these bigger channels, they make their money off of not, and I'm talking about energetic, I don't give a shit about like that, the money. I'm talking about like energetic money. They make their money, their attention, whatever it is, they make that off of, not directly off of avoiding the human story, but definitely subconsciously and in and around that story, they make their whole perspectives on ignoring certain parts of the storyline. And what I'm saying is that the human story is the second biggest deception ever. When you're talking about the heliocentric deception, you're talking about deception. The lie itself is just the mechanism to control people. Why are we not talking about control of people? The mechanisms of control are what add up to the power grid. That's why I say flat Earth, the way it is today, this mainstream Neil deGrasse Tyson versus Eric debate on the Joe Rogan Experience. Let's see what happens. You're still watching a fucking TV show. You're playing a game. If you're waiting around for that, you are not empowering yourself, and you're missing the whole damn point of being lied to in the first fucking place. Which is more important? The movie on the screen that's being projected, or the power of the people who are being deceived? The power of the people who are watching that movie. Because if they just change the fucking projector and the movie screen, the helpless and hopeless and still lost ass, empty ass people who are watching the movie are gonna fall for whatever they put on the fucking movie screen. We are not addressing what needs to be addressed if you're gonna actually do something about it. This shit is a controlled opposition to the umpteenth degree. That's why I said, if you don't come from the perspective of the human story, if you don't go into what has been going on, the deception itself, the definition of deception, not the deceptive storylines. What is the psyche? What are the algorithms? What is the alchemy behind being deceived? What are the stories that go hand in hand with power and control that comes down from lying to the entire world about the very nature of the earth? It's not as simple as just, oh, we'll just separate you from your creator, and all you got to do is reconnect with your creator, and once you reconnect with your creator, that'll be it. Well, how the fuck are you going to just ignore all the other power grids that were used to control people? That's what's happening today in these so-called woke and truther communities. You have these people empowering themselves from these Alex Jones ass type mentalities and perspectives as if they're fucking truthers and they know it all. They don't have a fucking leg to stand on in the roots of the human story. How did NASA come to be? How did Western so-called civilization come to be? What was used? What were the mechanisms used to convince people to believe into that false universe? What were the devices that were used to dumb people down that are still existing today? So much so that the system itself has to create a pressure relief valve called Black Lives Matter to hide the inherent racism that is still within the people. These police officers largely are going into these inner city neighborhoods. A lot of them are still in the KKK. What is the psychology beneath the KKK? What are they trying to protect? Let's just time travel back to 1950 when CERN and 50 something, when CERN and NASA jumped off. What was the mindset of the American population at that time? Were there still people in the streets still being lynched? Were there still houses being burned and people being dragged down the street? Was that mentality still alive and well? Is that mentality still alive and well? You bet your ass it is. So those were the types of consciousness that created the illusion itself. It doesn't matter how far back you want to go. You want to go back to, just like Alex Jones only goes back to 1776, the mainstream flat earth community only goes back to the origination of NASA. And beyond that, if they do go back to beyond that, to when heliocentrism jumped off 500 years ago, they don't acknowledge what actually the consciousness of the people back then, that's not acknowledged. They only use that to back up the science that backs up the origination of NASA, because that's what NASA does. NASA is only empowered because of that math and that so-called science from 500 years ago. But what is the mainstream flat earth community focusing on today? They're only focusing on the Neil deGrasse Tysons and the Bill Nyes and all that other shit. Flat earth, or a little thing like InfoWars, or a little thing like reptilians for David Icke, or a little thing like the blue avians with New Age communities, a little thing like the Bible and Christianity and all these mainstream religions. These are tools to test you so you can figure out if you can activate your own power cells on your own. If you stay in those little safety bubbles and you don't challenge yourself to go beyond that shit, you will be subjected to whatever the consciousness of this control grid has set up for the next agenda. NASA, the university system, the public education system manifests destiny. It made its power by demonizing the original people of every land, the indigenous people of every land. To stay focused for a moment, where did NASA make its most of its money? Where did it make most of its power? In the United States. What is the United States? It's indigenous America. How did indigenous America become the platform for the heliocentric deception across the earth? By first removing the connection of the indigenous Americans from the land, the culture, their spirituality, their own alchemy, and demonizing them while making superheroes out of themselves. That's how this system came to power. And overall, the flat earth community doesn't talk about that because it's so prideful in the new information about flat versus globe. It's childish. And it's also part of, obviously, it's also part of the controlled opposition, which is why I can't understand why people are not seeing this on a larger scale. I know it's happening. I know some people are seeing this over time, but I've been speaking about this for over 3 years. I've been speaking about this information since before I started talking about flat earth. And it's been obvious for me. That's why it was so easy for me to entertain in the beginning the idea of flat earth, because I already had an understanding and overstanding that the system itself been lying about everything. I already have a connection to the indigenous people across the earth. I didn't need that much convincing. Not to mention that I'm already open to really looking at what's going on, and I think for myself. So I'm not the only one. Other people, like people in my family, they're just like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. It doesn't take that much convincing. But for people who are so vested not only in the earth, but they're vested in the so-called civilization, they can't even allow themselves, even their own friends, they're just like, man, that shit don't matter. How the fuck does that help me? How does that matter to me? They only give a fuck about themselves. And stuff like the New Age community is set up to maintain that. So the second biggest deception ever is actually what's going to empower you, because the first biggest deception that's being promoted by the system is you damn sure better believe that it's going to be co-opted. And that's what's happening right now with the so-called flat earth community. It's inherently being co-opted. Look at the map on the flat earth or the United Nations flag. Look at it being leaked out by celebrities. Look at, Joe Rogan always talking about it. Neil deGrasse already talking about it. You think they're not going to entertain this? They just fast forward to about 3, 4, 5 years from now. How long you think these individuals, whether it's this year or the next, it doesn't matter. How long do you think they're going to be able to maintain this, this arrogant sort of we're right just because we're right? How long do you think that's gonna exist? Well, if it's within however many years, then you understand that something is going to happen. So when that something is going to happen, how are you going to empower yourself when they do co-opt the only thing that you were using to empower yourself, which was flat versus globe? What legs do you have to stand on now? Oh, the fact that we're all human and that the creator is this and that and we're all that. You really think that? Or are you going to realize that all of the power and control deceptions in and around flat earth are actually addressing those, are actually what's going to empower people? When you heal the wounds, you have bleeding, cancerous, disease-filled people talking about, I'm a truther, I'm awake, I'm enlightened, full of fucking parasites, love and light parasites, patriotic parasites, truther parasites, grassroots at best, never going into the tree roots. Russell Means was talking about this. John Trudell was talking about this. Malcolm X was talking about this. Then you got people walking around with YouTube channels talking only about flat earth, acting like people like John Trudell, Russell Means, Malcolm X didn't even exist. Like the Black Panthers, it doesn't even matter what Fred Hampton was talking about. Oh man, don't forget about it. They were just caught up in the system that was designed to make more control and power. It's really about flat earth. And if you really want to get more closer to what it is, it's about flat earth Christianity. People always use these cosmologies, these images, but they never go into the depths of what they actually mean or what the people were actually talking about. They just use it as a prop for flat earth truth. That's it. That's the most shallow shit ever. And it's ultimately disrespectful. I've been saying this from the beginning. It's fucking disrespectful when you just use these images and don't talk about the people and not only don't talk about it, but you act like they don't even fucking matter. NASA in the Western civilization, this whole manifest destiny, it's the foundation. Manifest destiny, that psychology was the foundation for NASA. You think you're gonna win some kind of war if you take down NASA? What the fuck you think is gonna happen when NASA finally gets revealed on the mainstream circuits? They'll just activate some shit like CERN or simulation theory or the New Age community or whatever else it is. Why? Because they know people are still uprooted from their own connections to the human story. They know people will fall for whatever the system tells them because the people are still believing the system to be the superhero, whether it's because of fear or because they actually love this shit, or they're trying to protect their own investments, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. That's why I said, like, When you talk about something like flat earth, you're not talking about flat earth. You're talking about humanity first, the people who receive this information. And that's the biggest thing that the so-called flat earth community is having difficulty with right now. The biggest thing is people not being able to get over themselves, their own belief systems. They can't let go of the shit that was indoctrinated into their reality from back in elementary school. They can't let that go. So if that's the biggest thing holding people back from actually healing themselves and letting go of these mind control programs, then why the hell are we not addressing that head on? Why are we still wasting our time trying to expose like what the liars or the deceivers are, like how their modern versions of deceptions are? Why aren't we going to the roots of this deception? And what I say is a lot of the reasons why people can't go to the roots of those deceptions is because people don't even know what their roots are. And if they do know what their roots are, they sure as hell don't want to look at that shit. All these people over here in indigenous America calling themselves truthers and woke and awakened and enlightened, not a damn word about the indigenous storyline. Not only in America, but across the earth. Consistently avoiding that storyline. What does Alex Jones consistently avoid when he's talking about 1776 will commence? They're turning the freaking frogs gay. What do you think he's building himself up for? To distract you from? What do you think the mainstream media is building him up for to distract you from? He's a prop. The mainstream media is a prop. And the prop, the intent of that prop is to maintain a shallow level of consciousness that will not allow the people to truly empower themselves. You are convinced that you can only empower yourself based upon the systems that are being promoted by this program. Hence, Alex Jones and InfoWars. Hence, the aggressive progressives and TYT, and the mainstream media and your first woman president, and the mainstream media and your first so-called black president, and the mainstream media and Democrats and versus Republicans, and the mainstream media where everybody is cool because everybody is against Trump. You're not thinking for yourself. You're just jumping in somebody else's kiddie pool, thinking that you got it all. So all these deceptions that exist out there, you have these people in the flat earth community are masters of talking about the deceptions or the deceptions, but they continually avoid the deceivers and the stories, the deceptions in and around the deceivers, and just close that gap with, oh, well, you're racist, or like projecting that onto somebody else. You're racist for even bringing that up. You can't let that go. You're falling for the old story, the old paradigm. Everybody's human. Everybody's one. Everybody's this. Get the hell out of here with all that nonsense. Don't have time for that anymore. Never did. But I don't even allow myself to get caught up into it because I use it as a language to help people see how that's controlling people. Because that happened to me. I was in the New Age community thinking, oh, we're all one, we're all human. And then it never sat well. It was like, it was exactly the same kind of feeling it felt when I used to order a fish fillet extra value meal and a double cheeseburger and a 6-piece nugget and a high C lava burst. Like, I was really hungry whenever I was really hungry. And then I would get home and thinking it was tasting really good in my mouth, but my whole body felt like I wanted to die. It felt like a rock in my stomach. That's what the whole oneness, we're all human storyline in the New Age community felt like in my spiritual stomach. I was like, wait, something's missing here. This can't be it. And it's obvious because we're not really talking about, we're missing a lot of the storylines. What is that? And then when I started to bring this up to people that were in and around the so-called New Age community, I was basically ostracized. They were just like, well, you're in that low energy, you're this and that. I was like, what the hell? You can talk about aliens and interdimensional demons and all this other shit, but you can't talk about what happened to the indigenous people? The fuck? So Constantly, this storyline is being avoided because there are so many other stories in the modern version of what awakening and enlightenment and information is about. And there's a conscious effort to keep people from going into that storyline. There's a conscious effort to keep people from asking and answering those questions, because the system knows once people start asking and answering those questions, then that's what will actually hold NASA accountable. That's what will actually hold the Western civilization that predates NASA accountable. What was the psyche that created the heliocentric scientism religion? Why did they have to create that entirely new version of reality? We all know that heliocentrism was created to allow the power grid to become more powerful, because it prides itself as being the most evolved consciousness in the universe, against the indigenous people who were just, throwing sticks around, and they didn't know anything. They didn't have a spirituality, knowing that they stole all this information from the ancient people. Told you that they burned it and put it in underneath the Vatican. Put the information underneath all these university systems. Why do you think these university systems are charged with investigating these Native American, these indigenous land sites? Because they take the information that links the indigenous people to every part of this land, and then they hide it underneath the university system, no different than the Vatican and the Western so-called civilization hides all the information underneath the Vatican. It's the same mechanism to keep you from realizing the depths of the truth that will empower you. And the system knows that people are just going to buy Happy Meals. Just like a kid. When you got a box of cereal back in the day, what was the first thing that you were excited about with that box of cereal? The toy in the box of cereal. You didn't give a shit about the cereal. I mean, it was cool because at least you had some cereal, and it was cereal with a toy, not that like the welfare cereal that just tasted like shit. It wasn't even cereal. It was just like rocks and dirt and shit. But if you had the good cereal, there was a toy. But the point is that the kids only care about the toys, because the kids are used to watching the movie. They don't know who they actually are. They don't care about the essence, the nutrients in the actual food. They're not going to observe really the downfalls of the poisons that are in that food. They're not going to care about it, because it's a responsibility of the parents to actually care about that. But right now you have the children and the parents who are all consumed by the toys in the cereal box. Flat Earth is a toy in the cereal box. The conspiracy theory mentality that Alex Jones puts out in InfoWars and anchors it only in 1776, that's a fucking toy. And they use people like Donald Trump to make the toy of real change more vibrant. They used the toy of Barack Obama. He was a toy. And he sold you all of that. He sold you all of that hope and that real change and all that other stuff. And for 8 years, people sat around on their asses and didn't ask any more questions about what George Bush was about. They didn't care about that anymore, because you had 8 years of your first black president cereal box toy. And that's how people are being controlled. Ain't shit different from the flat earth community. It's still happening today. So instead of actually going into the alchemy, the psychology, the algorithms of how and why this system has to make people think, act, and feel a certain way, we just pride ourselves in supposedly not thinking, acting, and feeling a certain way. That's what Black Lives Matters does. It says, oh, well, I'm not like the KKK. I'm not like them. So I guess that's all I need to do. I just need to just not be like them. And we need to come together. So the same thing, George Soros and the system itself was rallying people around the idea of actual change and progress with, having Kaepernick take a knee and all that other stuff, and, bringing light to all this. When people think that they're actually doing something, it's like you're playing with the toy. You're not doing anything about the poison in the cereal box. You're just being distracted by the toy that was given to you. And since you never had a fucking toy before, Hey, everything's cool, right? Now we got toys. Now we don't have to deal with anything else. The Hegelian dialectic is not just limited to flat versus globe, Democrats versus Republican. It's way more complex than that. And the fact that there is a consciousness that has created these Hegelian dialectic programs, that's the main point. We get caught up in trying to not fall for the Hegelian dialectic, but a lot of the times we don't, most of the time, the majority of people don't actually go into what is the energy that's creating the Hegelian dialectic. What are the entities what is the consciousness that's creating the Hegelian dialectic storylines? You can trap people in the Hegelian dialectic. Then you can also have people priding themselves that they're not in the Hegelian dialectic. But the other space is you have to realize that there's a system that's creating these systems. It's not enough to just not be a part of that system. You have to disassemble the system itself, get into the roots. See, just not being a part of the Hegelian dialectic is grassroots at best. But going into the nature of the consciousness that's creating and profits from these systems, that's when you start getting into all the Hegelian dialectic storylines. That's a different version, that's a different approach. But since, it's so, people are believing that this is the only thing that's going to matter because we've been going through this for so long, and largely people are hopeless. They put all their eggs in the basket of flat earth, and that's it. Watch when the flat earth gets co-opted by the mainstream media, watch how many people are just going to fall off because they have nothing else to stand on. There's no roots there. You're not really empowering people with just flat versus globe. At best, it's a trigger mechanism, but that's what I'm saying. Trigger to what? If you focus on the essence of what it's a trigger to, which is empowering yourself from the root structure, then that's a whole different approach. That involves all of the storylines of deception, not just the biggest one of separating you from the earth, but separating you from your culture, your people, yourself. There's people talking about their truths don't even know what the fuck the human experience is, let alone do they think that it matters. Because the only thing that matters is what? Flat versus globe. That's it. What about the individual perceiving the storyline of flat versus globe? What about the consciousness that created the globe that shouldn't even exist in the first place? What other things shouldn't have existed in the first place? How about white supremacy? How about the mind control programs that are in and around everything? How about these mainstream religions that are out there that are running these pedophile rings and hiding all the information underneath the Vatican and underneath these university systems? How about the Hollywood mind control program that's also involved in these pedophile rings and also is designed to mind control you? How about the political system that is still standing on the platform of the idea of manifest destiny? They're still priding themselves. This is America. We're the patriots. They're still priding themselves in having genocided the indigenous people, not only in America, but across the earth. And people who are not talking about that are at least equal to the mind controller's intent. Because it's that intent it's the truthers, so-called truthers, who are not talking about that information, who are actually more dangerous than the people like Alex Jones who are overtly explaining where they're coming from. It's the people who are not explaining where they're coming from that are actually more dangerous, because they are going to create the systems that will make the majority of people who are in the limbo space, still caught up in chaos. They will create the platforms, the next belief systems. This is what the New Age community is about. This is what large portions of the flat earth community is about. They're not talking about the actual essence of being deceived in the first place. They're only talking about the actual deceptions. And like I said in previous videos, I understand the stepping stones of consciousness, the stepping stones of storyline. I understand that. But it's been 3 years now, and people are not dumb. people are also not unaware of this information that exists out there. Not only just from me and my channel, but just period. And even if there are, it's even more jacked up. And if they're not, and they're largely, a lot of them are consciously remaining ignorant for whatever reason. Whether it's just like, oh, well, I don't want to talk about that, or just, I don't think it matters. Both of them are equally fucked up. Like, none of this matters. How is this any different than the mind control programs of today that's leading up to people living in poverty, people being killed on the streets, people being bombed in the countries across the earth, people being separated from their families, their culture, everything? This was just the way how it happened back in the day. This is the lengths, the extremes that this system, that these people who are going to be completely okay with it. Oh, shit. Slavery? That shit was perfectly fine. Not that long ago. And you ask a lot of people today, they'll be cool with that shit today, too. That's how bad this is. People are priding themselves in genocide, priding themselves in massacres. Whether you want to call it that or not, you are priding yourself in the blood and the bones of the people and calling yourself woke, enlightened, awakened. This is why there's such a gap between the so-called black conscious community and the flat earth community and all the other communities out there. Largely because the people themselves don't do the work to see how all these systems are designed to have the same effect on people. It's not just that, it's the personal work that doesn't get done. The individuals themselves are just playing around with cereal box toys. And your toy is better than the other toy, somebody else's toy. There's people out there not playing with toys. They ain't talking about no damn toy. I don't need a fucking toy to help people see how they've been deceived about not only the earth, but everything, the power grid itself. When you tie in the evolution theory into flat earth, you're talking about the system, the evolutionary peak of that evolution theory is the university system. The foundation that evolution theory sits on is that the ancestors, the indigenous people, their culture, their alchemy, their connections were all primitive. They were less evolved. So the reason why you should worship today's version of what they're telling you that is the evolutionary peak of humanity, you should worship that. But you have people who obviously have destroyed the evolution theory in their own reality, but haven't really done anything with it. They bought the book that is titled Evolution Theory is Bogus. They bought that book, but they ain't reading it. They never opened it. It's still on the bookshelf. It's still over there. It's still under the bed. It's still got the packaging around it. Some people didn't even buy the book. They just walked by in Barnes and Nobles and saw it and think that's all they needed to do. Or they saw a meme about it. But how many people are actually going into and reading that book and what it actually means? What does it mean when you're talking about evolution theory being completely made up theory? What did that do to the human story? What did that do to the indigenous people? What did that do to the relationship that the power grid has with humanity today? What did that do? Not only today, not only for the future, but equally, what did it do to the people in the generations before us? Largely, a lot of people ignore that information. Don't even want to go into it. Why? Because look at all these other stories that are in and around your focus. And then people say who are caught up in that truth or bubble of conspiracy, everything conspiracy. They're not anchored in any way. They don't have anything to stand on. They think they're anchored in something because they're talking about chemtrails, they're talking about the pedophile rings, they're talking about reptilians, they're talking about this, they're talking about aliens, they're talking about the GMOs and all this, and flat earth, they're talking about all this stuff. It creates an artificial foundation. a chaotic foundation. So people are just floating around in nothingness, thinking that they're anchored in something, but you're not. You're anchored in how bad the system is when you're calling yourself a truther based upon all these other things that are out there. But that's not an organic anchor. That's a synthetic anchor. It was created, it was generated by the system itself. So I understand that this is a transition point that people are going through because I did it myself. I can empathize with that whole process. What I'm saying is that for the people who have the ears to hear and the eyes to see, that have been around this channel and in and around this so-called flat earth community for the last 3 years, man, that damn story, that time is up. That flat versus globe shit, that shit is done, man. That shit is done. Really fast forward to the future and ask yourself, how different is this from Alex Jones wanting to only go back to 1776? What do you want to go back to 1958 when NASA was created and CERN was created? Fine, go back there and make them, expose them. Great, good job. Now what? They're just going to activate CERN and simulation theory and some kind of new quantum version of reality. And still you're going to have all the people who are still only priding themselves in what they're not follow what they're now being told to be. They were told to be proud because we supposedly landed on the moon. They were told to be proud because we were the evolutionary peak from cavemen to the indigenous people to today. They were told to be proud that you're not a monkey. Be proud that you're not a floating piece of shit that was shot out the Big Bang. Be proud of all of that. Be proud that you're not living in a country that was run by savages and primitives. Be proud that this system massacred and destroyed all the original people and now acts like that story doesn't exist. And now you got so-called truthers also acting like that story doesn't exist. Get the fuck out of here with this. It's not new and it hasn't gone away. It's still existing in your university systems, in your public education system, in the mainstream media, in your friends, in your family, living fat and happy in the ignorance of not giving a shit about what's happening to the rest of the world, not giving a shit about how the power grid came to be, and instead priding itself in how, oh yeah, we're different because we're truthers and we talk about information that the mainstream media doesn't talk about. That's the pride of the conspiracy theory and flat earth community and all these other communities out there. Like the New Age community does the same thing. The same way the mainstream media prides itself, or the good guys in the supposed good guys in the mainstream media prides itself in not being like Donald Trump. The conspiracy communities and all these other communities that I just mentioned prides itself in not being like the mainstream media. It's the same trap. It's the same Hegelian dialectic. You can layer that with any so-called community. The Black conscious community does it. Flat Earth community does it. The New Age community does it. Democrats do it with Republicans. TYT does it with the mainstream media. Alex Jones does it with the Democratic globalists. It's the same thing. We're amazing. We're only amazing because we're not like bags of shit. So here's your choice. You either want a bag of shit, Donald Trump, or you want to be a superhero, Hillary Clinton, or Bernie Sanders, or whoever else they pull out of their ass. The deception itself, addressing that, will go into the Vatican. It'll go into the child slave sex rings that are everywhere. It'll go into Hollywood and the mind control. It'll go into heliocentrism. But people largely, consciously or not, still love this program. They still love Western civilization and Western society. They still love it. Even though they've been lying to their face because they ain't been killing their family members. They've been killing other people's family members. Been killing other people's entire villages, entire nations been taken out. Like people, like actual leaders. Like Gaddafi in Africa, who was getting ready to unify Africa outside of the US dollar. Taken out. all these other people, even that you want to get into even closer to home, look at all these holistic doctors that are being taken out. There's a conscious effort to keep you not only physically sick, psychologically and spiritually sick. And some of the most complex sicknesses and diseases exist inside these so-called truther communities. See, the truther communities, largely, not completely, but many people within these so-called truther communities pride themselves in how not sick they are, not because they're super healthy, largely because they're just not as sick as the sick-ass society. It's the same thing like I mentioned before. Oh, we must be healthy because when you're living in an illusion, that means you're super sick. No, you're healthy when you become healthy, when you get into the root structures, when you start to remove that cancer from the roots, not the grassroots, not washing, not getting, all the Christmas lights and all that shit off the tree. No. Getting into the roots of it, getting into the soil, the nutrients in the soil that house those roots. That's the only way you're going to be able to empower yourself and heal yourself. You're not going to be able to heal yourself just because other people are super sick. But that's what's been promoted by the system over years, over generations. The same way Alex Jones creates this bubble of the only change that matters started in 1776. Don't talk about the indigenous people. Don't talk about them. The only change because he's trying to save the Western civilization. He's not there for your benefit. He's not there to help you. Same thing goes for all these other people who are doing the same thing in their own way. They're not there to help you. They're there to help themselves. They're trying to sell you something. They're snake oil salesmen. Alex Jones is a snake oil salesman for Manifest Destiny. And he's selling the snake oil that he's selling you is the idea that the post-Columbian America is the best thing in the universe. It's the best thing since sliced bread. It's the evolutionary peak of humanity. He's the salesman for that. It ain't no different than people priding themselves in people like Beyonce and Black Lives Matter and this fake ass Black Panther Super Bowl shit and the Black Panther movie. These are fairy tales. And look at the people, like I said earlier, people looking at the fucking movie. Just like this is a good picture of what I explained earlier. The projection on the screen is what's controlling people, and the system knows that. The projection on the screen is the cereal box toy. So what really matters? I'm not saying that the projection on the screen doesn't matter. I'm saying that the people who are falling for the projections on the screen actually matter more. And if you only focus on the projection on the screen, and you don't talk about the people who are subjecting themselves to the projection on the screen, then you will only be setting up the system to just change the projection on the screen so they'll just believe another mind control program because you failed to address the people who were receiving the information in the first place. And the only way you can address the people who are believing this information on the projection screen is by going into all of the deceptions. Not one. That's like a superhero selling one thing. Like the New Age community sells blue avians, sells the extraterrestrial agenda. Flat Earth sells flat over the globe. Black conscious community is pretty much compartmentalized. There's a whole bunch of different. There's Pan-Africanism. It's just like, let's completely just disconnect and go back to Africa, completely missing the whole indigenous so-called Black American storyline. What does it actually mean? What is the feeling that you feel when you connect with your people, when you play your music, when you feel your culture? What does it actually mean? What are the storylines of the cosmology? What are the storylines of our ancestors? You are the only one that's going to be able to go into that information. Nobody else is going to do it for you. But there are so many distractions out there to keep us from going to those depths. People get caught up. priding themselves in being a truther or being in a black conscious community or having 1 million subscribers on YouTube or Instagram or Facebook or Twitter, having like all this. Well, what are you really about? These pressure relief valves that are promoted, like Black Lives Matter and the feminism movement and the LGBT and all that, the trans stuff, and they're getting ready to talk about the pedophilia being legalized and all this stuff. It's creating chaos. Promoting all of these women that are men and these men that are women in Hollywood, promoting that to people. And when it becomes mainstream, and best believe that's what's happening right now with all this feminism and this LGBT agenda stuff out there, believe that chaos is gonna go mainstream before Flat Earth goes mainstream. It's already activated. In fact, Flat Earth might be the activation point. When that goes, it'll just say, look, we're all one. We're all connected to Creator, and we're all this and we're all that. We're all human. We need to stop fighting on this flat earth. That's what makes a lot of sense to me in reference to what the mainstream media is already doing. So it's just like the Civil Rights Act. They didn't address the psychology. They didn't address the roots of where racism came from, where white supremacy came from. That algorithm, that alchemy was never brought up. The fact that these slave owners were rapists, pedophiles, human traffickers, and serial killers that's still existing today. That's why it still exists today. Because people accepted the Civil Rights Act cereal box toy back then and didn't address the roots. The same shit is happening today with Flat Earth. And when Flat Earth goes mainstream, people are going to accept the Flat Earth Act and think everything is all better. But you're not going to get into the rapists, the pedophilia, the human trafficking, the serial killing, the genocide, the colonization, the massacres. You're not going to get into that. This isn't black versus white. This is, like Dick Gregory said, this is right versus wrong. That doesn't mean that the black versus white construct doesn't exist and needs to be addressed. It's not to say that. It's to deepen that storyline and talk about right versus wrong. And we're talking about justice and injustice. Right versus wrong. Natural versus the synthetic.